This is now on record, everybody.
Uh-oh.
So only say the things you want to be known for saying. Um, appreciate you having you guys all here. Welcome to everyone who's attending. This is our second Revenue Management Roundtable of the year. If you haven't been to a Revenue Management Roundtable put on by Wheelhouse, it's just an opportunity for us to bring some great revenue managers and revenue professionals in the space together and have a conversation about what's going on in their markets and in their portfolios, kind of like right now, to just get an idea of like what strategies are being implemented, what are people thinking about, what are people concerned about. I know you may not have properties in the same markets as these folks, but a lot of the time when you're listening to a revenue manager, they will say things or talk about what they're thinking about that will be relevant to you or that may trigger an idea. And that's really why we do this, is just to give you an opportunity to listen to some of these professionals chat. If you don't know me, I'm John D. Relay, head of revenue management education here at Wheelhouse and a longtime revenue manager in the space. We'll go around and do some introductions and then I'll set the stage briefly and we'll just get started. Rick, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Pleasure to be here as always, John. My name is Rick Jernigan. I work with Brett Robinson.
It's 12:03 p.m.
Sorry,
It is.
it is. So if anybody wants to know what time it is in Gulf Shores, Alabama, where I operate, it is 12:03 p.m. Anyway, work for Brett Robinson. We're a pretty large operator here in our market, mostly in the condo sector. So we have about 1,820 units in all. And most of those, like I mentioned, condos, some hotel, and also a couple of beach homes.
Awesome. Thank you, Rick. Pleasure to have you. We'll just go around in the order of my screen. Rebecca, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, John. My name is Rebecca. I am a Chief Operating Officer with Rev Research. We are a revenue management consultant firm, has clients all across the world. So we do everything from education to full service revenue management. Excited to dive in with other people to talk about nerdy things that nobody else in my family or friends want to talk about. So
So true.
I'm excited.
Um, awesome. Thank you, Rebecca. Sorry, I was reading the chat. Rafi, I'm not sure what you're asking there, um, but we'll go forward with the introductions. Thank you, Rebecca. Meg, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. My name is Meg. I'm with VRMAdvocate. Much like Rebecca and Revenue Research, we are a firm that does everything from education to hands-on revenue management, but we also move on and work with clients on all things marketing, all things operations, team building, all those different types of things. And I'm excited to be here. This is my first roundtable, so.
Glad to
Nice.
have you here, Meg. And Chris, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Chris Wheeler. I am in the Panhandle as well. So I'm owner operator of Scenic Stays. We have about 450 properties from Panama City Beach to Navarre Beach currently. And then also Chief Revenue Officer for Stakeholders VR. So we have thousands of properties across the country that we're rolling out in 2026. So excited to be here as well.
Awesome. Pleasure to have you. Um, so thank you all the panelists for coming. Really looking forward to this conversation. If you haven't been or listened to a roundtable before, we keep the structure pretty simple. We're just going to talk about what kind of happened in the last quarter, what's happening now, and what you're thinking for the future. I encourage you to think about specifics in terms of like the kinds of data you're looking at, the strategies or trends that are really catching your eye. And it's conversational, so I'll go around and call on people, but please feel free to just jump in and steer the conversation in any direction. Um, we did one of these in January, and a lot of the conversation I think was around just a little bit of trepidation. The year seemed to start off slow for a lot of places. Ski aside, which has a lot of weather, it did seem like things were a little slow. People weren't sure when that booking window was quite going to start or how spring break was going to be. And a lot of the revenue managers on last call were really just talking about being pretty conservative, really trying to get ahead of the booking window this year. Um, and there was still a lot of confidence that professionals were going to be able to operate pretty well and perform pretty well, but it was going to come from this conservative viewpoint. For you guys, I'm curious, how did the rest of the winter kind of wrap up? How did your strategies for spring break kind of come together, saying that we're in the middle of it? And what worked for you and what didn't? And who would like to start?
I can start.
Okay.
I think the ski, it's different in every destination, right? Like, so for the ski destinations, some of them got hit really, really hard because of the weather, right? And you'll hear in the Southeast, we always hate what we call windy days because they are such displacements for our season and what happens. But the ski destinations really, really saw that happen. But at the same time, there's other winter destinations, such as, the top of Wisconsin, where people like to go snowmobiling out in Deadwood. And they had a hard time. They had a very, very difficult time because once again, they had no snow. And those types of destinations don't have what we see a lot of the ski destinations are able to offer, and that is non-ski activities or non-snowmobiling activities. And so they also took a real big hit, and we started focusing more on their more peak season much earlier than we ever have before, because we knew that we had to get a good start on that in order to recoup some of the revenue that we were losing because of the weather. So moving forward, I think it's just really watching very closely, every destination, even the beach destinations, we're seeing a little stagnation, as the economy is constantly changing, it seems, every day. And so many of these things do impact travelers and consumers and how they act, what they want to spend, what they're willing to spend on. It's a hot mess in some regards. A little bit, it feels like it's just every week I feel like I'm like, oh crap, I have to check that. Oh wait, let me check that. So I'm looking at data points I never really paid a lot of attention to in the past, are taking a more forefront view of those than I ever did before.
What are some of those data points that are catching your eye that you hadn't had to dig into before?
Honestly, I've been tracking a lot more of like total revenue, like how are the fees impacting? How are fees? What can we do with fees? Getting clients to move from flat-based fees to more percentage-based fees, because the overall, right? Some of the OTAs limit how many fees you can have. What are ways to get around that, but not destroying profitability for the company, right? We still have to pay salaries. We still have to do all the regular business things that we want to do, but that's one that I've looked at, comparing, my client against the competitors in the area. And in some regards, even comparing them against like destinations, right? So ski destinations all have a different personality, but there still is some commonality amongst anything that's a traditional ski destination. So looking at how we compare to those, Vail took a big hit. They had no snow. Vail Resort, as a resort to go skiing, and took a bit of a hit as well in its reputation. So people who would normally go to Vail were looking at those other destinations because they just wanted to ski. And so I think it was valuable for me to pay attention to how Vail compared to those, especially for them this year, in order to keep them ahead of the curve as much as we could.
It's really interesting you say that. I brought something up on one of these last year, and I think it's still pretty relevant, but I think it's also relevant for the non-ski stuff.
Mhm.
Is in an environment where the consumer is really needing to fit a budget, you're probably competing outside of your market much more than you think you are. And
True.
there was some really good research, I think, put out by the Panama City Beach CVB,
Mhm.
and they were basically just doing surveys about what's your favorite beach. And the difference between summer and spring break stood out to me huge. In summer, a lot of people go to their favorite beach. Spring break, it was like a list of 50 beaches, and they were like, well, I'm on Panama City Beach, though, and you're surveying me, but here's all the other beaches I would be at. And it just to me indicated like these folks are looking at other places, and if they're not going to the place they really want to go, they're probably being driven by economics, right?
Mhm.
And so you are competing, and it's important to know like if a market nearby to you that has reasonable beaches or whatever is really suffering and their rates are going to start to collapse, that may impact you, and you actually have to cast a little wider net at a higher level. Unfortunately for all of us tracking all this data, right?
Yeah, but it's more tracking, right? So there's a lot more research phase in doing revenue management now than I've seen in the 20 years I've been doing this. It's a huge shift. It's a huge shift.
Yeah. Awesome, Meg. Well, thank you. Who wants to jump in next and talk about how things have been going kind of up until till now? And you don't have to focus on the winter.
I can go ahead. Yeah, I can kind of jump in, John. So kind of pivoting down to Gulf shores, really, and the Gulf of Mexico. Our spring break has ended up, I think, shaping up to be very good, as a whole. So I'll be kind of interested to hear what everybody else has to kind of corroborate that. But I mean, really, we started kind of gaining some traction, honestly, after the first of the year, and really that pace hasn't slowed yet. Thankfully, knock on wood. Obviously, there's a lot of uncertainty going on globally right now, so our focus is shifting a little bit towards that. But in terms of the short term bookings right now for us, because we are in the middle of spring break, obviously they continue to stay strong, and so that's very positive. But as for us, from a revenue perspective, I mean, we're getting close to hitting like COVID type numbers this year, and a lot of that, John, has been driven by just honestly coming out the gate with an occupancy focus, understanding the price sensitivity within the market, and just really the information that we can learn from the past couple of years, in particular. So when we were just kind of game planning, that was really our strategy all along, and it's kind of come to fruition, thankfully. But again, we're also seeing higher demand. We've got higher searches internally on our website than we did at the same point in time last year. So again, consumer demand is obviously increasing as well, which is helping to drive that. Kind of interesting takeaway though, right? From like what you just mentioned in terms of casting a wider net, potentially people coming from a further market reach. That we also believe is having a slight impact as well. We're a driving destination, but we're starting to see that I think we're getting people from further distances that are coming, and they're probably shopping us to other beach markets, just like you said. So, but all in all, right now our spring is looking really good.
Rick,
Yeah.
I'm really curious about with everything going on with TSA and everything, how that's going to impact you. I don't know off the top of my head, are you primarily a fly to, or you're a drive to?
We're a driving destination. I think historically, whenever we start to see air flight tickets increase dramatically, that usually actually kind of bodes well for us. But we'll also kind of wait and see. We've been doing a lot of dialing in, obviously, over the past couple of weeks, just looking at historical gas pricing influxes and trying to pull back. I'm blessed where we've been an operator in this market for 40 years, so we have a lot of historical data that we can kind of go back to and look at. Some of it easier than others, obviously, but we've been kind of going back a little bit in time and trying to kind of recall, honestly, game planning for scenarios, right? Like we're kind of at an inflection point. There's a lot of uncertainty out there about what our summer may end up shaping up to be based on the current environment, specifically driven by gas. And so what does scenario A look like? What does scenario B, et cetera? But yeah, so typically though, Meg, it usually bodes, I think, well for us historically. But again, we'll kind of see, right? I mean, who knows where that ceiling may end up capping.
You never know when it's going to take a left turn. That's what I say.
That's right.
Yeah. Do you
And
think
I
that
actually,
Go ahead,
sorry,
Rebecca, please.
I have a huge theory on this. So I'll put on my tinfoil hat and go through that everyone around me has heard of lately. Because I live in Gulf Shores, so just down the street from Rick. Have some clients in this area, but also have other clients in the Panhandle Beach all the way to Texas. In the last, I would say 60 or so days, we always see spring break be a shorter booking window. We always do. People want to see the weather. Weather's been crazy this year, especially the Midwest folks, our Tennessee people who've had a terrible winter, are waiting to see is the beach warm. However, I do think that a lot of the things that are happening in Mexico right now are keeping a lot of US families stateside, where spring break they might be going to Cancun or a all-inclusive resort or all of those things for spring break because they know the weather is always warmer. And I think with the media, and I'm not trying to downplay what is happening there because it is very awful. But in the minds of a lot of families, it's the whole entire country of Mexico is off limits. It's not isolated events that are a little bit more, I think, truer to the fact. You just hear the headline and see, oh my gosh, if you go to Mexico, you're, not going to leave, essentially. And so I think there is a lot of that. I think also global issues of, international Relationships are also, you see the Instagram or the TikTok videos of the families stuck in hotels in Dubai and all these other things, and people are going, "Oh my gosh, I don't want that to happen to my family. I would much rather be able to drive, and if we need to get home, we have our vehicle. We're not relying on a rental company to drive." Then you add in the TSA side of things. And again, I've had a lot of family and friends flying in the last week that don't have the experiences of what you're seeing online
Mhm.
of TSA being really long. Now, granted, there are some airports like Atlanta, some of those other ones in Texas that are really awful. There's others that walk right through TSA pre-check. So I think it's again, the media is playing into a lot of that and creating this sense of kind of panic. And so it is driving decisions for families to go, hey, we're not saying we're not going to go, but maybe we're going to just go to the beach for spring break because we can drive there and be back,
Mhm.
in a day. And so I do think that there's a lot of that happening now, whether to know that data specifically, it's pretty hard unless you're having a conversation with those guests. Most of them are booking online, so you don't
Mhm.
really have a data point for that. Um, but it's, a pretty strong theory. I think also the gas prices, I don't necessarily know if we're going to see that affect during spring break as much as we'll see that later in the year.
I gotta bring that up with you
Meaning
guys when we start talking about planning for the summer is what are we
because
planning
it's
for here?
yeah, you're paying an extra 20 or $30 now. That's coming out of your discretionary, fund. And so that's coming out of your travel budget. It's not necessarily people are going, oh, we don't want to drive for spring break. They're just getting in the car and coming. I think it's going to have kind of a ripple effect as we look farther out into the year.
Mhm.
And so I just have gone down this huge rabbit hole of looking at flight data and just different things, travel data to see if I'm just crazy or if that's a pattern that I'm seeing in the data. But seeing pickup, looking at where the guests are coming from, it's kind of connecting the dots pretty strongly.
I'm I'm gonna go to Chris and ask how things have been going, and I want to kind of come back to this because Rick did say that like he's seeing higher demand, and I'm curious if like that's actually the market or if that's just Brett Robinson, or like is that happening across all the Gulf spring break markets, right? Like, so Chris, how are things going in your markets? What have you been seeing? And then we can kind of see if like I want to talk a little bit more about is demand actually going up or is it just moving around and we're, robbing Peter to pay Paul or, actually competing with each other, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of really interesting things here to consider. We started talking about the weather, and that's one of those other things that you can't really measure, but we consider that spring break, particularly for drive to beach markets, whether it's the East Coast, the Panhandle, the weather's a consideration too. When you're talking about 15, 30-day booking windows, having a great spring, and then your top five markets being all within, driving distance and they can see the weather's great. That's going to drive up bookings too. So that's a big influence for sure. I remember that's something people always said, well, we're having great weather, so it's going to be a good spring. I thought that doesn't really factor in, but it does, it turns out. So, I mean, measuring that is like, it is important, however you measure it or just consider it when doing rate, monitoring your rates. But, with, Easter, I think in February, you'll talked about Easter and its impact on spring break. That really has influenced how the Panhandle spring break has come to be as well in every market, really, because earlier in the year means we're going to have a couple really high occupancy weeks. Last year, later in the year means the occupancy is going to be spread out a little bit.
Mhm.
So we had to really look at the cuts of inventory. So the high-end luxury properties are going to perform differently when Easter's earlier, and then March really trending for the first quarter, but the last 2 months has been behind 10-15% in pace. And then here, because I think partially because we had really good weather, it picked up to where it really is flattening out pretty well. And then April's trending up. So spring's turned out for a few different markets to really be pretty good. It didn't look like that for a minute. We were going to have to do the March plus April trick to make spring look good. But now March is flattened out, so we're okay. We can look at them separately.
That's good.
I
So
laugh at Mark. The March plus April block. That's how we used to do it on Hilton Head too. It's like just group them together. Don't look at them independently.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
One
And one
month.
of the big things too, I think, of all this is how we educate owners. We've mentioned that, and it's going to come up again, but how to educate owners on all these nuances so that they can understand that when they get the solicitation for those who book better than us, how do we let them know that these are all trends that are real and that everybody's experiencing them too?
Mhm.
Absolutely. So I mean, the last minute window seems to be very strong. I had a friend in the industry. He's more of an urban guy. And he was talking to me like he thought that things were going to get pretty good in the spring. Because when people started getting their tax refunds, they were going to be bigger this year. They're going to do it. And I kind of agree with him, but I think people got them kind of late. Like it seemed like things were really slow until you got into like later in the year. And another trend I've noticed, which is more of an urban trend, but a lot of these urban southern markets are like March high seasons.
Mhm.
And they've all kind of shifted over into April and May. Like March was actually performing not great in a number of them. But April and May are like significantly ahead for some reason. And I've been curious if like how much of this is being driven by the economics of people just like when they have the money, they have the money, they're gonna go shift, but they're really being very flexible about when and where they go now because you know, it felt like 5 years ago, it'd be like, hey, we go in March, we go in July, we do this, this is where we go, we'll pay whatever it is. And now it's like very nebulous where these guests are ending up and where they're purchasing. And then I'm not sure if you guys are seeing that. One thing I do want to ask, because it sounds like both Chris and Rick have said that this last minute has been pretty good. I don't know how conservative you guys were to get that early, as Rick said, but Rebecca and Meg, do you guys have stuff in other markets like in Texas and stuff? And how are they doing for spring break? Are you seeing similar trends? Are you seeing growth there too?
Yeah, so like South Padre Island, they always have a shorter booking window for the clients that we work with there. So we really had positioned ourselves ready to know that. I think the real takeaway this year, and has been a theme for the last couple of years, is you can't get in the mindset of, well, this is what we've always done. Like that is
Mm.
my like what trigger like word. I don't ever want to hear that. And I think that's just becoming more and more relevant and more as we're having these conversations is like we can't count anything out anymore. Like if we're starting to kind of see a trend, like we have to pivot. We have to start making decisions earlier and earlier. And, even getting aggressive with pricing, and I tell people this all the time, I'm like, we can walk this back. We can increase these. If we see the booking pace pick up tremendously, we'll walk it back. Like there's no rule against that. We make the rules. Like we don't have to be, subject to the market. Now, if we want to crush goals, then let's come in and run this. And so I think that that is something that is really easy to say, like, oh yeah, I want to do all these different things. But then when you bring to teams and go, hey, we're going to do this. Oh, I don't know. I'm kind of nervous. Like I had one client today who's like, I want to rip all of my mins to one night. I was like, all right, let's go. Let's do that. Okay. Like he was like, can
Party.
we raise rates on the, I'm like, yes, yes, because I've been talking about this for 5 years. Like, and it was his idea, which I'm totally fine with that. I'm like, yes,
Always
let's
their
do
idea.
it. As long as we don't have any HOA rules, any county rules that we're going to get in trouble for, like, let's think outside the box. Let's get creative. Let's get your visibility higher. Um, I think it's just looking, I mean, revenue management is always putting the puzzle pieces together.
Mhm.
And I think you just have to keep turning those puzzle pieces until you find something that fits. And then you take it and you just apply it across the board. And that always works for all of them. But sometimes it's like, all right, that worked for this struggling unit. Let's replicate that and see where we can go. And I think that's just becoming a louder and louder thing. This year is just not getting stuck, not just letting the pricing tool sit. You have to manipulate it, look at those settings, adjust them. Not saying that the tool is wrong, but it's adapting. And we have to, make sure that we're not tying our hands behind our back just because we want to keep things the way that they were.
And that's true. I mean, Rebecca, you made a couple comments that just were like music to my ears. You know, you talk about you cannot use the same things you were doing in the past. That is impossible to do. In anything, you have to just forget about everything you've done in the past and almost be like a brand new revenue manager and start thinking outside the box. And there's a big thing, back in the like the early 2000s. I'm dating myself now, but there wasn't gas prices, right? Gas prices were going up. There was economic issues, all that. And everything back then was, what is the perceived value of a vacation rental? What is the perceived value of that rental compared to hotels, right? How do you market that? How do you talk about that? Now, hotels have come around a long way, and that variance of perceived value is not as great. But for people who are traveling, there's still opportunities to speak that message and to say that. And visibility is the key to that, whether it's through marketing, whether it's through reducing your min lengths of stay just to get more traction on the OTAs, whatever you need to do, optimizing your listings, doing all of that. These are all so valuable and so necessary now, where they used to be like, oh yeah, I'll get to that. And that's like a message that we've been sharing with a lot of our clients now, is like, we can't just manipulate prices anymore. It has to be a little bit more of a comprehensive look as how are we marketing the property? What do the images look like? What can we do on the OTAs? Are there new OTAs, which I know some people are going to cringe on, that maybe we want to join and do that? We have a wide variety of clients in both urban and leisure markets. St. Padres Island is Galveston's the same way. We're not doing much of anything. That is so weather dependent. If it's going to be a nice weekend, we'll get the bookings type thing. I think the market for me right now that has been the most all over the place is Washington, D.C. You have a destination right now that is hit by so many things that you would not normally think about. Politics is such a huge thing there as to whether or not people travel and don't travel there. And a destination that's highly relies on foreign travelers coming in, they take a hit with that. Top of the fact, they've had some really bad snowstorms, take a hit with that because it's a very, very tiny booking window. Complicate that even more with a drastic increase in the number of units that are available, not as drastic as it's been in the past, but it is still somewhat growing. So you have even more competition going on. It is just all over the place. And we've had to make drastic changes to the way we are handling their revenue, their marketing, all of it, in order to keep ourselves moving in a more positive direction than we ever have before. So it's just every destination is unique. Every destination has its issues that it has to overcome. And for Rebecca and I, you guys are lucky. You're in one destination. We not so lucky.
Or we are, because then we just get to go to another one. So if you're having a
Like,
really
I don't
bad
want to
one
look at
market,
this spring break anymore.
yeah, I look at another one, I'm like, all right, I know what I'm doing. I got this.
Yeah. I've done that. I've seen that. Yeah, then that's true. That is true, though. But it's even more of reinventing the wheel, right? Reinventing and thinking of new ways that we can go about. And so many clients, so many property managers are always like, well, we never did it that way before. I don't want to hear that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the
You
supply
can't do
thing you
that.
mentioned sticks out to me quite a bit because, after the supply peak in our industry, and obviously it's a little different depending on what market you're in terms of where they are on the curve, but it seems like supply has really slowed down in terms of its growth. In some cases, starting to retract a little bit as that kind of lower cost stuff kind of exits
Mhm.
the market or really exits its marketability. But there's a lot of places where the supply situation for hospitality is not following our trend, right? Because like I've noticed if you're in a market where there's hotels being built, when we were at our peak and starting to feel like, hey, maybe we're oversaturated, that's when the hotels were getting permitted and now they're coming online. And
Mhm.
so even though our industry may be pulling back, there's a number of hotels are actually now starting to put on pretty significant jumps in inventory. And keep in mind, when a hotel brings forward inventory, they're going to adjust their pricing strategy quite a bit for like two
Okay.
years,
Yeah.
right? And so if you are looking at the vacation rental stuff and seeing the supply situation being kind of like, maybe better when you're just looking at our metrics, go look at your CVB, go check and see if you've got other hotels because we may not be out of the woods from that like just straight supply competition. Obviously, if you have inventory that's like luxury homes and stuff, you maybe don't have to worry about that so much. But if you're doing like condos or even anything up to like 2 and 3 bedrooms, there's a world where those people may be competing with you and or at least just depressing the price situation that you can charge, right?
And that's really prevalent in the urban, right? You know,
Yep.
what's the difference between a studio and a one bedroom and a hotel room? There used to be a huge variance in what your stay would look like. There is not so much anymore. And so hotels are huge competition in urban markets.
Yep.
Well, especially when it comes to a lot of the big events, the
Hmm.
as we're, there's revenue management for short-term rentals, and then I feel like short-term rental event pricing is a whole nother beast, and that is where you really are going toe to toe with the hotels, and that's becoming more and more prevalent in a lot of these areas. Concerts are getting bigger and bigger, draw or these artists are doing, bigger and bigger things. We learned a lot from the Taylor Swift era, but it's now you're getting the same type of thing, with a lot of these events drawing huge amounts. You've got the World Cup, you have all these big things. We're in a couple of years having the Olympics. So, I mean, we're really have to be thinking because, like John was saying, with these hotels coming up in these very urban areas, families or groups of people that are coming together, you have such an advantage, but your pricing, it's you have to hit it right. Otherwise, you're really going to get left in the wind.
Big major hotels are good to watch for events. I think though you do have to kind of think about how they operate, which is they
Hmm.
generally aren't operating fully off of transient business like we do. And so they're going to charge less on really big events than they maybe could, but they're also going to charge more on events that aren't as big for us. Right?
Yep.
Like they're just going to hold a more stable price. So you'll see,
Mhm.
you can look for little bumps, but you don't want to follow their price because you don't
No.
know if they really don't care if they're booked transient or don't even want to book transient. We also like have a better product, so we tend to be able to have a lot more elasticity on the high end, right, in our
Hmm.
industry, because people prefer the product if they can get it for something like that. So the other thing to keep in mind when you're looking at hotel rates in particular is they may have price bumps on stuff that aren't an event, that aren't driving demand because they're selling their product to groups, and that's going to establish the price 2 years in advance that they can't undercut. And so I've seen that happen where people look at hotels and they're like, they're bumping their rates up here. It's like, yeah, but that's not your demand. They
Yeah.
just don't
No,
care about selling to the person on Expedia.
the hotel is the event. You know, when
Yeah,
you pull, if you think about, even Darm, right? We are an event at that hotel. That doesn't greatly impact any of the vacation rentals around Darm, but that hotel is able to get a much higher rate because we're all lazy and don't want to have to walk.
true, true.
Well, and the hotel doesn't necessarily mean that they own all that inventory either. Where
Yeah.
if you are having a apartment complex where you have 10 units in it, you have control of those 10 units. You're not giving half of them away to
Mhm.
another booking source. So I think there's tons of, I mean, we could spend all afternoon talking about the differences, but it's just again, other factors that if we're having these one-off events that we're not sure about, it is good to look at all deciding factors.
Well, let's shift over into kind of what we're expecting for the summer, right? And you can do late spring. I know a lot of us are in the panhandle, so it's not like super strong time, so we can really talk about summer. If you guys do want to bring up anything in the spring, please feel free. But, you know, we're almost done with spring break. Easter's about, a week away or whatever. Um, how are you guys seeing the summer shape up? How are you, what strategies are you putting in place, right? Like, and how are you shifting your strategy from where you were thinking at the beginning of the year or even last fall, right? That's what I'm curious is what are you guys doing now? How are you adjusting when you're thinking about your summer strategy and your summer pacing? And Chris, why don't we start with you? I did you last before, so give you a start.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing we look at is we're trying to learn and adjust based on spring patterns. So I know we are kind of exiting spring, but we kind of take that logic that we learned in Q1 and those booking windows and try and apply it a little bit. And we're big on occupancy, like I'm sure a lot of people are, but leveraging that with the booking windows we've seen so far. So we get pretty aggressive on both sides of it. If we have some underperformers from the spring, that we're getting more aggressive on pricing than we were last year, perhaps, or even in the spring. And then some of our luxury inventory that's performed really well, we're getting aggressive on the high end of pricing too. So we really look at that performance, put it in conjunction with last year and the market. But in terms of just generally speaking, what the summer looks like, it looks strong so far in terms of pacing versus last year, just internally and versus and market level. It looks like it's going to be strong so far. Now, like you mentioned, we've got a lot of focus on spring right now, but we're optimistic about the trends for the summer as a whole. Now, segments within the inventory, whether it's one bedroom all the way up to 10 bedroom homes. Smaller, we're more aggressive on pricing, and then larger, we're seeing some really more positive trends for sure. I think one thing that we've noticed too, because we talked about it today a little bit, is direct bookings are still holding pretty strong. So we see a lot of resiliency with direct bookings, which is a good trend, for sure.
Yeah, I really like this, what you mentioned about extrapolating your over and underperformers from the spring and the winter into the summer, really
Yeah.
just using that data and applying it right away. Um, I do think what you mentioned about the kind of high-end homes doing pretty well, that's kind of a trend we've seen kind of consistently for almost, I would say, 2 years now, is like the early booking window is good. And then there's like a missing piece in the middle that used to be there where like everything kind of dries up and it's unknown whether that's because the consumer is changing or I always think, our revenue management in the space is hard because you have to represent each owner. So everyone's always like, I think we're just inherently always a little overpriced or unoptimized to the consumer during certain times.
Yeah.
And professional large operators have a little more flexibility. It's where you hear people be like, I'm conservative, I'm doing great. But, there's always that incentive structure where like you can't go to an owner and say, hey, I'm going to sell yours lower so I can figure out how to sell the rest. Right. Um, and I think that means we're always a little bit unoptimized to the consumer, and it especially is occurring in that middle booking window, right? When people are pretty price sensitive. And we're not dropping yet. But those are all pretty interesting things. So you're saying it looks pretty good right now, a little bit of hesitancy as you watch it, and you've applied a lot of these learnings from the spring, right, Chris?
Yeah, yeah, that's for sure. And I think we've talked about length of stay a little bit. That's where even
Mhm.
large properties, high-end luxury, we've leveraged that by dropping length of stay. And you don't see that as much anymore, those high length of stay nights, but we even a few years ago really pushed and used all the data we've got to show we can drive ADR by dropping that length of stay. Because no matter the property size, I feel like if you don't have a certain occupancy percentage within a certain number of days of arrival any time of year, your strategy really just becomes hope, and hope is not a strategy. So that's what really any property we're trying to avoid. Whether if the average booking window for peak summer is 7 nights, I just want to make sure I've hit my occupancy by 7 nights prior to arrival because I don't want to have unoccupied nights 3 days prior and just really hope that random person's going to come in and book it. So that's what we're trying to apply, even from what we learned with spring, is if there's certain occupancy within arrival dates, we don't want to be in a place where we're having to do what everybody talks about, these big slashes just to get something in there.
Yeah, I like that. Setting those thresholds before so that you know what you're trying to hit and you're again just making these adjustments more granularly earlier.
Yeah, and just deciding what KPIs are important to you. There's so much data, like we talked about, that you could get just paralysis by analysis. So just figure out the KPIs that are really important to you that you're going to watch rather than trying to take everything in and you just get lost.
Yeah,
Mhm.
awesome. Rick, do you want to tell us about what you guys are seeing for the summer and what you're thinking?
Yeah, no, I mean, summertime is shaping up to be very good. Obviously that's our peak season down here at the beach. But kind of to piggyback off Chris a little bit, very similar approach, right? I mean, and not to get back on the bandwagon of this is the way we've always done it. We always approach every single year with a fresh lens, right? We take the learnings from previous years of operating and we just say, okay, we've got this in our toolkit. We know what to see if we start to see X, Y, or Z. But moving forward, again, the demand patterns are always going to shift, and there's always going to be things that are going to change. But so for us, I think coming into any season, it's always forward planning, right? Like I'm already thinking about summertime, coming out of summer this, like I'll be thinking about next summer, coming out of summer this year, right? Starting to plan, doing some deep dives. So that's usually what we kind of like to do is kind of dissect our portfolio again. What were the takeaways and learnings from this past summer? And what changes do we need to make and implement now so that we're priced right heading into really, the upcoming year? And so that's really what we did this past year. We saw that work out fairly well. Long story short, part of our portfolio, the underperformers, if you will, really dove into that section. How can we get these things positioned better, for movement? Did that. We've seen some really good increases there. But really the overarching goal for us was build a strong foundation out of the gate, right? We really want to make sure that we have a strong foundation established going into the new year, building some positive momentum and just keep it moving forward, right? And Rebecca talked on something, or it might have been Meg, excuse me, earlier, the value proposition. The market will tell you where we need to be in terms of price, right? So it's that fine tuning continuously to hit that magic threshold to just drive, total RevPAR, really, in general, and kind of make it. But overall, the market's looking good. We're looking good too internally in terms of our current pace. I believe the market's up right around 18%. We're right there with it as well. So again, good foundation. I will say it was kind of interesting looking at the market analytics for our area. ADR is down. And I don't feel like that's a common thing that I've usually seen historically when benchmarking myself to the market. So that also tells me that the operators in our area are getting a little bit more savvy and understanding where we can and can't hold rate. Another takeaway, and I think we really kind of started to pick up on this last year, is kind of the hourglass effect, right? And you touched on it just a minute ago, John. Luxury properties are able to hold and push rate almost, right? I feel like that mid tier, though, that's where we've seen a lot of struggle with trying to really identify where is that value proposition currently for that consumer. And that, I think, for a lot of operators, at least for us, is kind of, I would say, my biggest challenge right now, right? Your lower end stuff, that's going to be priced accordingly. Your higher end stuff, that's pretty safeguarded. It's that middle section that we really have to continue to monitor and kind of baby, if you will, almost on the daily to really, I think, drive it home and get the good results. But overall, summer is shaping up well. Interesting thing that we've picked up on, though, and again, I'm not trying to kind of bring in the global global events that are currently going on, but 2 weeks ago we did see quite a bit of dip just very suddenly with I would say primarily our peak booking season. And so last week is kind of when we kind of saw that come to fruition. I'd be curious to see Rebecca, Meg, Chris, if you guys kind of saw a similar thing. We were booking well. We had some good momentums going. Honestly, since January 1st, our bookings have been very good and up most days year over year. But we did see that dip 2 weeks ago. It's kind of picked back up again this week, which we're thankful for. But I'm kind of curious if anybody else has kind of seen almost a similar booking pattern specifically for like summertime bookings or what even you may consider your peak season based off your market.
I did not see that.
No?
Neither.
I didn't, but I think right now, especially more than ever, it is a surgical approach. I think
Yeah.
especially looking at your level of number of units, your strategy is, you have that, but then as you're adding more units every year, your top end numbers can look great, pacing looks great, but if you look at it by unit, there's always those bottom performers. There's always those 10% that if you get those turned around, then the good pacing now looks great. And so I think that's really been something that I've seen. And there are those properties, those luxury homes that will hold their value that I'm not as concerned about. They have good pace, they're looking good. If they're year over year, maybe off $5,000, that's just one reservation. And maybe that's going to come in next week when last year it came in the week before. So there is a lot of that. I think that you have to really look at the data by unit. And I know that's like our team goes crazy sometimes just having to take a big portfolio and pull back the layers and go, all right, is this property really struggling, or is it struggling for a certain month? I think it's becoming more and more evident when you look at that data that the property that's struggling, it may just be off because of May, because now there's not Hangout Fest. And last year it had that money on the books, and that's a big music festival in Gulf Shores that isn't happening this year. And so like your May numbers, like we knew coming into the year when they announced that it wasn't happening to really pivot very fast and make sure that we were I knew I had a lot of money to make up very early before the year started. And so I find that a lot of the companies that I work with that are being more proactive and not just letting things kind of happen. We want to get ahead of those units that are pacing behind year over year. Yes, the booking windows are shrinking, but like that just means the time on the clock is running out. And so I would much rather make that decision earlier on than having to play catch up. I mean, John, you always talk about chasing the booking curve. Like, I think that is always sticking with me when I'm looking at some of this, going, you don't want to chase the curve. Like, it's exhausting and it's really hard to catch that wave again. And so I think that is becoming a bigger and bigger and bigger issue just as your markets are changing, events are changing. Um, it's not just a, hey, this is our strategy for summer. It's this is our strategy for 3-bedroom luxuries. This is our strategy. Like you're really having to segment your portfolio.
I,
Yep.
I I think there's a big element of like, and I think professionals know this, right? It's like, but occupancy is your baseline. People always want to talk about ADR, but like, this is all iterative, right? Like, you're always just being an editor and improving step by step. And the most stable thing you can operate from is an occupancy, right? If you know that you can maintain 70% occupancy, but you're not super, satisfied with the ADR, you can come up with strategies to increase the ADR. But if you have one booking at your target ADR and no other bookings, you really have no idea about what the property is worth at all.
Yeah.
And so making sure to establish an occupancy baseline, especially when it comes to low performers, right? If you have low performers on occupancy, just figure out where they sell and then start to try to improve them. Don't, otherwise, what you're doing is it's kind of like what Chris said. It's like the hope is a strategy. You're just picking numbers and saying, well, I hope the consumer buys it, right?
Yeah.
If you focus on establishing those occupancy baselines first, and this is also true when markets change, it's like, hey, yeah, maybe you got to throw out your goals and you got to review your budget, which means review your spending coming forward, but go figure out where the consumer is actually going to buy because you don't have control over that. You should be responding to that, right? And just remember, none of us really know. What we're doing is little experiments all the time to just try to figure out where the consumer is. You know what I mean? Um, Meg, did you want to comment on kind of what you've been seeing in the summer as well? And then I want to get into one more thing for the last 10 minutes.
All right. I mean, it varies once again, it varies by destination, right? I have beach clients that I've worked with for a number of years now, and they have what I hate to use this term, but throwaway properties, right? They are properties that for the summer months particularly, they are always the last to book. They are always some ones that we have to look at. We were very proactive this year. We went in with much lower 3-night minimum stays in a market that's traditionally a week long with a little bit of a higher ADR. We got those off the books, right? We got them booked. And so that was great. The homeowners were happy. We got higher ADRs than we were, booked them out farther in advance, but it was a really, really aggressive. I mean, I was talking like last July, we had this July set at lower length of stays, but it worked. It worked. In a destination such as Vail, which really struggled because of the weather and everything, we've been very aggressive with monthly rentals. Vail traditionally has a fair number of people who come and stay for 30 night stays or longer in the summertime. And so we did a little bit more marketing around that, and we've been pushing those a lot more. And that's actually helped bring our summer numbers way ahead of where they were before, which has been great, knowing that there is still an opportunity for some of the last minute things. And then in what DC, it's taking advantage of an event. It's America's 250th anniversary, and the best place to spend that is in the capital of the nation, right? we are actually seeing ADRs coming in equal or damn close to what we saw for the inauguration, which is extremely,
Hmm.
extremely high. And we took that approach with, we started very early on. We've done some, once again, some marketing behind it, some SEO practices, adding specific event-based pages behind it to try to capture as much traffic as we possibly can. And it's
Hmm.
made a huge difference in doing that. But I think what everybody here is saying is we've learned a lot of lessons in the last couple of years, a lot of them. And I think this feels like the first year that we are really taking advantage of those lessons that we have learned and putting practices and theories into place that are making somewhat of a difference. I'm very optimistic. I hate to say that out loud because you usually don't talk about the things you don't want to get messed up. So that's all I'm going to say.
Um, I'm going to take this into a more specific question about the summer, but you did say something really interesting to me there, which is like marketing's so interesting in our space. I felt like 15 years ago, marketing was the thing. OTAs came up. A lot of marketing and reservation sales practices got forgotten. They're all kind of becoming more important again as things get difficult. And there's some new technology that helps, like making event, like you don't want to just spend money, right?
Mhm,
Like clicks, OTAs will always beat you on clicks, but if you have really targeted investments, it can work, right? So if you're making pages for events, we also live in a world where like it's very easy to put together pages now and
mhm,
to write things with AI. And so that's a
mhm,
really interesting, like I think there's a lot of really clever marketing ideas enabled by AI where you can actually have very limited spend, but really target your impact. And it's going to require your revenue managers to work with those marketing people to come up with those ideas, right? Because it's all about being very granular, right? Not just throwing your money out there and wondering what's working. Now, what I did want to talk to you guys about and ask you about is, as we all know, there's a war going on. Oil
mhm.
prices are being affected.
Really?
There is. I hope that this gets resolved very quickly, but I'm wondering if you guys, how you're thinking about that when you're planning for summer. It sounds like you guys have said that you're pretty optimistic. We're seeing this early booking. But someone said earlier, like, I think it was Rebecca, that the gas prices probably aren't hitting us right now. It's like, yeah, it's already in your discretionary income. But as the longer this goes on, the more this is going to build into other costs, right? Like diesel is up a ton. As food goes up, as regular stuff goes up, we're going to potentially see, the longer this goes on, a much tighter environment, and that probably won't happen till May. So how are you thinking about adjusting or trying to pace and incorporating this concept of like the war and the oil prices right now, if at all? If anyone wants to jump in.
I had a
I think
boss once that said that I don't care what's going on in the world, everybody wants to go on vacation. And in some regards, everybody needs that little bit of happiness. I do think that, and we started this early on in the conversation, they do look at other destinations. They maybe look to drive to and not have to, I don't care how expensive gas is, it's still going to be less expensive to fly 5 people from New York to Hilton Head. It just drive
Mhm.
the 14 hours, make an adventure out of it. And so I think people are looking at that. But as accommodations providers, which is just a small segment, the most important, of course, of any vacation, I like to say I'm somewhat optimistic. I am very fearful that competitors will start dropping rates because they freak out a little bit, because I think it ruins it for all of us across the board in some regards. Because then we're once again going to be battling to push those ADRs back up. But I have not taken any of that into consideration, John. It seems like everything changes on a dime nowadays. We're at war today, we'll be out of war tomorrow, it'll be totally different. We could be on to something else that could be worse or better. You have no idea. And I just keep watching the pacing, and I just keep watching where we are and kind of sticking a little bit old school as to what I need to do to just keep that going forward.
Yeah,
I think it's good advice.
I think we've got a lot of proactive data points now too that can help us. I think Rick mentioned earlier web traffic. That's a really important one, and some of the market metrics, and I like using a lot of the data that the OTAs can provide us because they have a lot more than we can
Mhm.
individually collect. So that I agree there. Just if we can watch those measurables and say, hey, web traffic's still up, we're still seeing a lot of visits to our individual pages via our OTAs, then and if our conversion's okay, I think we're fine. We've seen gas fluctuations. We've seen, unfortunately, these type of situations before. And yeah, I agree. If we just keep watching those measurables, then those proactive measurables that we didn't have, not long ago, then we can make adjustments as necessary.
I think it's really important when you're dealing with any of this kind of stuff. It's really hard to take your personal feelings and emotions out of what you think could be happening and really looking at the data and because there's so much talk about the World Cup and with the immigration and all that stuff, no one's going to want to come and this, that, and the other. And I'm not seeing that. I mean, I got some of the best book, like I'm gonna print them out and probably laminate them to remember
Great
that
thought.
at some point in my life we were able to get this type of booking. And it's, yes, do I hold my breath every day and check it to make sure it didn't cancel because they're still outside the cancellation period. But, it is, I think at the end of the day, we have to look at the data, like Chris was saying, and just do what we do best, host guests, make sure they come back, make sure they love us. And that's all we can really do. I think there's always going to be something there's always going to be something. There's always, and so whether it's, as long as your inventory is still open and available, we all bounced back from COVID. I mean, unfortunately, some people weren't as lucky as others, but I remember sitting in the same seat, going, am I going to have a job in 8 weeks?
Mhm.
Like, is this industry going to come back from this? And it did 100 times more than what any of us probably thought was going to happen so quickly. And
Mhm.
so I think that you can't let the media get you all riled up and you have to stay focused, and unless you see a major surge of cancellations or something like that, I think you have to stay the course. And also for your teams, encourage them, let them know that you're aware of, we're watching it, we're acting, communicating that to owners, that you have a plan in place. Like there is an emergency plan, but we're not there yet. And so I think that it's hard because you turn on the news and it's, you're freaked out and anxious by the time, that 20-minute segment is over. But I think at the end of the day, we just have to keep focusing on the big picture. And I think 2026 has potential to really surprise us at the end of the year if we stay at it and stay diligent. I think that we can see some really good end of the year growth.
Yeah,
Rick?
I agree. Just to kind of piggyback and kind of close this out, pay attention to the narrative. Don't let that dictate your actions. Look at your data, right? And kind of make your judgment calls off of what that is telling you, right? And but again, I do think have a plan, right? Have a couple of plans, perhaps. If this ends tomorrow, what's that going to look like? If this goes on, et cetera. So that's kind of where my mind is at, just from a planning perspective. But that's also just how we kind of operate, right? That's kind of how my
Yeah.
mind is. I'm a planner, and so have a plan. But again, to Rebecca and Chris's point, exactly. Don't let the narrative dictate your actions, right?
Yeah.
Totally agree with that. I'm a huge fan of like have your plan B and your plan C. Like imagine what the situations are. And it's not really unique to like this. It's just like what happens if we start pacing differently, right? You should
Exactly.
always be having that plan.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Well, and all of
Um,
us on this call have had live or work in hurricane season. It's
yep.
how we handle every May
So
through
true.
November. Like
Right.
we don't like to say that word out loud, but at a drop of a hat, you have to clear everybody out, and it's not about you. So it just is that same mentality in a different way.
Yeah. And honestly, the advice I would give here is the same as I've been giving for the last few years, which is try and pace ahead. In an environment where things are volatile, try and pace ahead. It seems like the trends are that things do pace ahead and then they slow down. So incorporate that into your plan. And then, your plan B would be knowing that like it might slow down more in that middle window. What do you do? Do you end up where you need to end up by the time you end up? How much more do you have to pace to get there? And then I would say like honestly, look for the opportunities. These drive-in markets, I don't think the gas price is going to stop the people because like you said, people want to travel. It's going to stop them from flying somewhere, which means you actually have an opportunity to go tell those people, "Hey, come to us." Come book early. I
That's
also
right.
think early booking is a good thing because I think that it's kind of like the sunk cost thing. People will go on the trip if they paid the deposit, but they may not plan the new trip in a few
Yep.
months. So there's a lot of, I think, opportunity there if you organize your marketing and your pricing around like some of these bets. And at the end of the day, I think as we've continued to hear from professional operators, even though like the macro seems difficult, there's a lot of optimism among professionals in terms of taking market share and being able to make the most money they can for their owners.
Yeah.
Awesome, guys. Well, we're at time. I really appreciate this conversation. This has been great. We will have this up on the Wheelhouse YouTube, and I hope to have you guys on another conversation soon.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
John.
John.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.